Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy and welcome to this tutorial on relative, absolute and fixed positioning in CSS. Now in this tutorial we're just going to take a quick overview of all of these three properties, the one property with three different values. So we've got position relative, position absolute or position fixed. You might not know what they are, what they do, how they relate to each other, but we're going to create some examples that simply demonstrate relative, absolute and fixed positioning in CSS, and how we can sort of, use particularly relative and absolute in conjunction with each other to sort of get some desired effect. So what we're going to be doing for this is creating one main container. I've got my style sheet linked and open here to ready to start styling my containers. The first thing I'm going to do is create an overall container. So I'm going to create a div element, and the ID for this is going to be container, and inside of this container I'm going to have an inner container. So I'm going to say div ID, and that's going to say inner, and in here I'm going to just type some contents, and I'm just going to write content. That's all I'm going to write. Okay, so now let's go ahead to our browser and preview this. I have Element Inspector open at the bottom here. I just right clicked Inspect Element in Chrome. You can see that I've got content here, we've got the container, and then we've got the inner element inside. So nothing's really, doing much at the moment. It's just sitting on the page. You wouldn't even know that a div was wrapped around it. Now what we want to go ahead and do is to demonstrate different positioning. We want to give this container a width and a height, and we want to give the inner a width and a height and a background color as well, just so we can see where things are floating on a page at any point. It's going to make it a lot easier for us to determine what different property values do. So let's go ahead and style our container. I'm going to give this a width of 300 pixels. I'm going to give this a height of 300 pixels, and I'm going to give it a background color of #777. It's just going to be a darkish grey color. So when I refresh, you can see that we've got this box here now. Container, inner content still in there. We're going to go ahead and give that some properties as well. So let's go down #inner. I'm going to give this a width of obviously slightly smaller. I'm going to give it 100 pixel width. I'm going to give it 100 pixel height. Sorry, I typed width twice. And then I'm going to give this a background color as well. Now I'm going to give it a background color that's slightly lighter so we can see it against that sort of dark grey container, but we still want to be able to notice the difference on the white background, and you'll see why in just a moment. So let's go back to our browser and refresh, and you can see now we've got this muddy grey looking color on top of here. So now we can sort of talk about different positioning. Now by default the container, if we go down, I don't think we're going to be able to find it in here actually. No, sorry. Let's just go ahead and start from the basics. Okay, so we've got our container out here, which is just sort of sitting against the edge of the document. We've got the inner element, which is sitting against the inside of this main container. So that already tells you something about this kind of positioning. It's telling you that this inner container, because it's nested within this main container, is just sitting against the edge of it. If I was to have this inner container outside of here, you'd see we'd get something a bit different. So let's go ahead and just pop that outside of the main container. And when you refresh, you see it now sits against the edge of the document there. Okay, and then this is sort of pushed down. So forget about that for now. We're going to take a look first of all at relative positioning. Now by relative positioning, elements sit against each other or in their natural flow. So really, if I was to go ahead and say position relative and style inner as position relative and then go ahead and refresh, you'll notice that nothing has changed. And the reason nothing's changed is because we're not really doing anything different than the browser is already telling us to. We are, but we're not. I'm not going to go into massive detail, but really everything looks the same as it did before, which is natural. Everything's sitting against each other. It's relative. Each element is relative to one another. Now, we're going to look at something slightly more interesting now. We're going to look at, well, that's the end of position relative, explaining that. We'll come back to it in just a moment because it does actually get a bit more interesting than that. We're now going to look at position absolute, okay? So position absolute is going to allow us complete control over one or over any element we give control to. So at the moment I've removed position relative, everything stayed the same. I'm going to now give position absolute to the inner element. And I'm going to refresh, and nothing's changed. The only thing that's now changed is I can go ahead and I can specify a top, a left, a bottom, or a right value. Okay, so I'm not going to use many of them. I'm just going to use top for now. I'm going to say I want this element to sit 10 pixels from the top. Now, before we demonstrate this, let's go ahead and just give the container a margin of 30 pixels. It's going to make it a lot easier for us to see what's going on. Now you can see this is all shifted along, which sort of proves the point that this is sat against this main container here. We've got a 30 pixel gap, as well as a default 8 pixel margin that's set by a browser. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to specify a top value to this inner, so 10 pixels from the top. Now what you would expect to happen is this square here, this div element here, to come 10 pixels down from the top. Okay, the left is unmodified, so it will just sort of come down. You'd expect it to just sort of peek over and 10 pixels down. Let's go ahead and refresh and see what happens. You can see it's moved up. Now that's really odd. It might look like it's sort of shifted its way up, but in actual fact what's happened is we've set a top value, and this sort of comes from the outermost element, the outermost relative element, if you like. Because this main container is not relative, it doesn't notice it in a way. That's a really sort of basic way of explaining it, but now it's becoming 10 pixels from the top of this as opposed to 10 pixels from its parent container. Now the parent container, we can regain control of the element within it. The container, we can say position relative. Now this won't change a thing to the container, but what it will do is it will change the way that elements interact with each other within. So let's go ahead and refresh. You can now see that it's come 10 pixels from this relatively positioned container. And we can do the same with left. So we could say left 30 pixels. And what that would do is instead of taking us left from here, it would take us left from here. So when we refresh, you see it comes 30 pixels over. So that's how we can use position absolute and position relative in conjunction with each other to sort of bounce things off one another in, simple terms. Okay, so now that we've looked at that, I'm going to look at position fixed. Now to do this, we're going to need to sort of, change things around a bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a selector to the body, or I'm going to use the body selector, and I'm going to say height and just say 3000 pixels. Now what this is going to do when we refresh is it's going to give me the ability to scroll down the page. Okay, so this is as you'd expect. We've got an element on the page, we want to see more of the page, so we scroll down. Okay, makes sense. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this container element to position fixed, and you'll see what happens. Now you might have guessed when I go ahead and refresh, oh, everything looks normal. Let's go ahead and scroll. You can see nothing's happening. And the reason for this is that this element has now been fixed in this position in this window. Okay, nothing is not going to move, it's going to stay. As we scroll down, anything else we've got on the page will scroll. For example, let's just go and place a some text here. Oh no, sorry, that's within the container, my mistake. Text here. Let's refresh. You can see that text has gone up there. We've got a fixed position object, so this is just popped right straight back up to here. When I scroll down, you can see that disappears and we see the rest of the page, but this element has remained fixed. So these are the three positioning that you're most likely to use, or the only positioning that you're likely to use. Relative and absolute are going to be something that you do day to day when you're working on templates, designs. Fixed is not usually something you'll work with unless you're creating something that you want to stay on the page. For example, a menu, a floating menu on the left, for example, on the right, something that's fixed on the page, for the user to always have in view, or any special effects that you might create with your pages. But generally, relative and absolute positioning are the ones that you would definitely use and definitely need to practice with. So go ahead and sort of test this out for yourself, especially with the relative and absolute positioning. It's not really as hard as it seems. You just need to remember that if you're going to absolutely position something within a container, it needs to have the relative position to it. Okay, so that is positioning in CSS.